Thank you all so much for joining us today for the Nonprofit Learning Series. I'm Robin Thompson. I am a fundraising consultant. I am based here in Vail, Colorado. And as many of you know, my new book was just published. It was supposed to be released on April the 8th. We know what happened mid-March 2020. And I needed one small change in my book before it was actually printed. My graphic designer got stuck on a mission in Nicaragua and didn't get back until the end of June. I knew I couldn't release a book during COVID and not have a chapter on crisis fundraising. Wrote that chapter, book was printed, I received it, and it had a page missing. So the printer was horrified. They said, "We ordered the paper today, we'll have it printed tomorrow." Well, hurricane hit Mobile, Alabama the next day, which is where my book was printed, and they were underwater. But finally, I have my book. It's available on Amazon.com called Putting the Fun in Fundraising: Secrets to Raising More Money Faster and Easier. I'm excited to have you here today for the Nonprofit Learning Series. We are sponsored by the Vail Valley Partnership for Mountain Youth and U.S. Bank. I do this for free. They sponsor us so that they can get the message out to everyone, and everyone attends for free. But very excited today to have a couple of funders for our funders panel. We have Owen McClear, who is the Senior Grants Program Officer for Western Colorado for the Daniels Fund. He joined the Daniels Fund in 2010, and a lot of us know him from the Western Slope Rural Philanthropy Days where he spoke. He's responsible for working with nonprofit organizations in 8 funding areas throughout the western half of Colorado. Besides his role as Senior Grants Program Officer, he also worked in the Communications Department as the Special Events Manager and coordinated the Daniels Fund meeting space, which is offered free of charge to front-range nonprofit organizations. So welcome, Owen. Thank you for being here. Also, we have Lisa Rucker, who is a Senior Program Officer for the Gates Family Foundation. She's been with the Gates Family Foundation since 2014, and she's the primary foundation staff for the Capital Grants Program and oversees the foundation's grants management system. Lisa was most recently a program officer grant administrator for the Anschutz Foundation from 2009 to 2014. So welcome, Lisa. We're glad to have you here today. Well, I'm going to start out and just ask both of our panelists to tell us a little bit about your organization. Tell us about your mission and goals, and then describe your current funding priorities. What's happened to your funding during COVID? Will that continue? Will you reevaluate those funding positions? Owen, let's start with you.
It was April 30th. So we have an interim, Hank Brown, Senator Hank Brown has been our interim CEO since May 1st. They have been in a national search. They will be making a decision and naming a new CEO at the end of the month. So starting January 1st, we might have a whole new set of priorities. I really don't know. So in addition to the change that we did with COVID, we're also under a little bit of change, and things aren't quite as stable because of the leadership change. But with that said, what we've been doing with COVID, mostly with existing partners, we set up a $5 million COVID emergency fund, and we've been using that. We've spent about $4.5 million so far. Mostly, like I said, to existing grantees. We really didn't take on too many new ones. However, we did, because of the situation, we did fund some other emergencies. We funded the fires that we've had this year, which is normally not something we do directly. We usually fund that through Red Cross, but they were so traumatic and devastating this year that we funded $100,000 to the Larimer County United Way to cover the Canram Peak, and then 100,000 to Grand Foundation to cover the East Troublesome Fire. So, you know, there's a lot of shifting around. In the beginning of COVID, the board was kind of saying, you know, everything that comes in has to be put into context of COVID. So that changed everything. But then we started hearing from existing partners and projects that we had been thinking about that were coming to fruition. And everybody was saying, hey, you know, don't leave us hanging just because we're not directly involved with COVID. We had capital projects that we were thinking of, and they kind of got pushed off for the middle part of the year. But then we went back in August, and in the last two meetings started funding those again. So we're kind of back to funding regular grants, regular programs, regular capital grants, regular general ops grants with all the grantees that we've been working with in the past. Our strategies haven't changed. We still have 8 funding areas. Everything I say about the funding areas and the strategy is on our website, so you can get more details there. But we cover aging, amateur sports, disabilities, drug and alcohol addiction, early childhood education, K-12 education reform, homeless and disadvantaged, and youth development. So those are our 8 specific funding areas, and we have subcategories underneath that. Pretty broad. Then for Western Colorado, or actually all of Colorado outside of the Front Range, we have 4 priorities that are guiding our funding. The first is career and technical education. The second is facilities that encourage community gatherings. Most of that is capital programs. The third is proven programs that help people that are suffering from addiction. So that can be prevention, treatment, and or recovery programs. And then the last is kind of a collective impact type, large collaborative initiatives. For example, Right Futures in Kathleen Merritt's organization is the head for a 7-county collaborative for youth or for early childhood education program, doing the pyramid coaching model. So it's a 7-county collaborative, and so that falls under that last priority of large scale collaborative projects. So given that, I think that's a fairly good overview. The only thing I could say other than that is the best thing for a potential grantee to do is to email me with an idea that they already have looked at the website that they think fits one of our categories. We'll have a discussion. If I think I can get it approved, we'll move forward. If I think it's not ready yet, we'll have more discussions and work on it until it's ready. And once it moves forward, there's a process that's fairly lengthy. It goes through our grant staff, then it goes through our executive staff, and then it finally goes to the board for a vote. And it could get eliminated at any point along there. So sometimes things don't actually get to the board. They get declined before that, and the board just approves the decline, but they don't get, it doesn't get recommended as an approval. So it's a lengthy process, but if you talk to me first and we carve out something that we think will have a potential to get an approval, that's the best way to do it, rather than just try to send in a grant application without any discussion with me. So.
Right. Good. Well, thank you for that overview, and we'll go into more depth here in just a minute for some of the other questions. Lisa, why don't you talk a little bit about what your overall look and funding priorities and what COVID's done for you all?
Well, first off, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with the wonderful folks on the call today. Gates has been around 70 plus years, Gates Family Foundation, and have always been committed to improving the quality of life for Coloradans. And our focus on that to do that, we support equitable public education, stewardship of the state's vast natural resources, and investments in vibrant communities, which is a broad topic. In relation to COVID, specifically grant dollar wise, we reallocated $1.6 million of our 2020 budget towards COVID relief, and all those dollars have been expended. We committed another over $7 million to program-related and mission-related investments through different vehicles across the state to help small business, PPE type investments across the state as well. About 30% of our grant making is capital dollars. That's land acquisition, new building, major renovations. And the other buckets that we have within the foundation are education, and that's equitable education across the state, and natural resources, protecting land and water, stewardship, those type of things across the state, and then community development and investing in rural and urban communities across the state. Those are initiated grants, meaning those project teams identify strategies within those areas that they want to focus on, and then find the partners that they're going to invest on. It's not an open application process. Capital grants, again, we're across the state, and it's pretty wide. Everything from arts and culture to health and human services, natural resources, parks and rec, and community development pieces.
Wow. Okay. So that's a broad range of what we can ask you more questions about here in a minute. So as you look at what how nonprofits would know, Lisa, whether they are a fit, since you cover such a broad range, how would they do that?
Right. I would echo Owen's size. Just give me a call or swing me an email. Let's set up some time to talk. If you want background information on a Sunday, you're not comfortable calling, take a look at our annual report or past funding that we've done most recently. I mean, we've shifted in the probably last 10 years, and our 6-figure capital grants really aren't as many or as wide as they once were, just because we shifted our funding priorities more towards initiated grant making. But again, our annual report and our website database, grants management database, shows what we funded recently across all our sectors.
Great. And so, Owen, is there anything that disqualifies nonprofits if, you know, like I know locally sometimes we hear if there's anything to do with the marijuana industry, that they can't apply for funding. If it's a new nonprofit that they've only been around for a year or two, sometimes we hear that funding foundations call that a startup. Is there anything within Daniel's fund that would exclude us immediately?
Yeah, the marijuana issue is a big one with our board. So if an organization is getting funding, so it's not a hard and fast rule, but let me say this: if I'm working in an area of addiction, so either prevention, treatment, or recovery, and an organization is getting funding from the marijuana industry, that would eliminate them right off the bat. If we were working with a K-12 organization and they were starting a charter school, you know, it wouldn't be a positive thing, but it's not an elimination right out of the gate. But it would have to be discussed, and it would not be a positive thing. So the marijuana funding would be a big issue. As far as startups, that's not an issue. It's more about fit versus not fit. You know, if the program or the organization fits with what the Daniels Fund board wants to do, we have helped people start up right from scratch. We have imported people from out of state to start up something from scratch in Colorado because of a strong fit. If there's a startup and they're a tangential fit, so that they might be in amateur sports, but it's really not a specific area of amateur sports that the board has zeroed in on, then it might be a push or a hold. Let's see how it develops. We need a little more track record before we can present it to the board. So it's really, outside of the marijuana issue, it's really more about, does it really fit what the board wants to do? And our 8 specific funding areas are fairly general, but the board gives us feedback on everything. So we have a feel for which ones are a bullseye and which ones are tangential fits, even if they fit into that overall category. And so that's why I say the best thing to do is have a conversation with me. We also have an inquiry, open inquiry line where you can schedule a 15-minute call with somebody in our grants department. And that's okay. You can go that route, but the fastest way to get a strong and candid feedback is to contact me.
Great, good, thank you. And what about you, Lisa? I saw you shaking your head there when he was talking about startups.
Yeah, there's always and tell me more. There's no hard and fast rules with Gates either. We just want to learn more about the projects. We have no hard and fast rules around startups. We often fund startups. We incubate startups through our initiatives, often within the foundation. Things that wouldn't fit with us broadly are capital grants programs strictly for capital. There's no project support. There's no programmatic support nor general operating support. It's rare also within our initiatives that we're doing general operating. Those are more of launching something or something that's beginning and end. There's some exceptions that are vital to those those ecosystems of education. Needs an advocacy group that does it really, really well. And we find advocacy very vital to education. So we'll fund those around, provide general operating support for that. As far as where funding comes from, especially for capital projects, the wider your net is for community support, and your case is for showing community support, and what that could be multiple multi-million-dollar donors in your community, or it could be breakfast burrito bake sales or sales that you've been having for 5 years to raise those funds. So obviously nothing excludes you, but the more widespread community support you can show for your project, the better it is for the project in our eyes.
So it's that collaborative, just like what Owen was talking about, just collaborating with other local nonprofits.
Yeah.
So one question that came in, and if you all want to put your questions in the chat as we go through and they fit in, I will ask them. So Owen, somebody asked if they had been funded over 2 years ago from Daniels, do they need to go through the inquiry form on the website, or should they contact you directly? What would you recommend?
If they had been funded in the last 2 years, I was probably their program officer, so they should just contact me directly.
Okay.
Even if they were funded 5 years ago and I wasn't their program officer in Colorado, the fastest way is still through me. What happens on the inquiry, just so you know, it's a formal, out-facing, open portal, so that we don't close down our communication to anybody. But what happens if it's a possible, they send it to me. So you might as well just cut out the middleman and come directly to me.
I like that. And so what about with you, Lisa? If you funded before, do they need to go through that process, or should they just call you?
It's a capital grants program. If it's a capital grant, you can submit an application, but I'm here as a resource to help. I'd love to help you navigate to position that capital request the best, maybe timing wise, the best time to apply, what things we should discuss and what you should highlight in your proposal, maybe the right ask in your proposal. So those type of things. I'm often the triage for inquiries that come in relative strategic initiatives as well. So if you think something fits based on your research or what you've heard, or you work in the education field in general and you just want more information to see if you're a fit, I can also connect you with those appropriate program staff. But also all their information's on our website as well.
Okay, so all of you all here that both Owen and Lisa have been so gracious to be with us today and offered for us to call them. And so before you start writing a grant, before you do anything, please contact either Owen or Lisa about it.
So I just want to clarify one thing. Email Email is the best way. Calls are hard to take because usually in doing something. If you want a phone call, email me and we'll schedule a time to connect on phone. But email, I answer all my emails within 24 hours. So.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. So if somebody received funding from the marijuana tax in Eagle County, Owen, is that the same as from companies?
No. Okay. Taxes, government funding, that's fine.
Okay. And then for the Daniels Fund, does a capital project need to be funded at a certain amount that's been raised before reaching out to you, Owen?
So yeah, so we fund, all three: program, general ops program, and capital. And for a capital program, it still has to fit one of our 8 funding areas. But once we figured that out, if it fits in the funding areas, as a capital program, we tend to have a max of 10 to 15% of a program, but that doesn't mean that we'll always go that high. If you have a $10 million program, that doesn't mean you're going to get 1.5 million from us. But over 10 or 15% is a stretch, even if it's, unless it's a small capital program and we're the only funder besides the organization themselves. The way we fund it is, we have, and this is based on experience, in the past, if it fit, we funded, and the money sits in the organization's bank until they get enough money to pull the trigger on the construction project. And sometimes it doesn't go. They don't raise enough money. Things change. The board decides this isn't the right time to build this. Let's postpone it. Well, in that case, we want our money back, and then they have to send the money back. So they came up with a rule, and that is we can approve a grant, make a commitment, but we won't fund it unless the organization has raised 75% of their capital campaign goal. And that 75% includes whatever commitment we make. So, for example, if you have $1 million project, that would be 750,000. Say we're doing 150,000. The organization would have to have already raised 600,000 plus our 150 is 750. We would fund that at that point. And it's an arbitrary number. It's a number that we think if somebody has raised 75% of their campaign goal, it's most likely going to succeed. If you come to me as your first funder, we can make a commitment, but it's not going to get funded till you get over 75%. And the board is much more apt to approve something if we're close to the 75% versus first one in, because they'd rather us fund it rather than have this commitment hanging out there, hoping that it gets to 75% at some point, and it's just becomes a bookkeeping problem. And so it's much easier to get a funding if you're at the 75%. But that doesn't mean you can't come in as a first fund, to Daniel's Fund as a first funder. We've done that, it's worked, but it's a little harder to get it approved at that, as a first funder. So.
Great. And what about you, Lisa?
Yeah, we asked that for capital grants, we asked that folks have at least 30% raised committed in-kind reserves prior to applying. Traditionally, I'd say probably 5 years ago when I started, most of our grants would go out the door as challenge grants. Like Owen said, we'd make the commitment. The organization would be challenged to reaching some threshold before we would release funds. And it's so competitive right now. And as Owen knows, and many of you know in the room, there's not many capital funders. Our capital grant requests have gone through the roof, and we haven't focused on any specific area. So we're shotgun everywhere just to fill some need. So our grants are our average grant is maybe 55,000. The median's around 30, 40,000 in capital grants. So that's insignificant in the scale of a capital project, right? Mm-hmm. So most of those grants are going out the door now. It's hard for us to carry a 6-figure grant on our books. We have to usually split it over 2 years just because it's so highly competitive. The ones that are 6-figure grants, capital grants, are ones that are highly aligned with our initiatives in education, natural resources, or our priorities in community development on the initiated side of the house.
Wow. Okay. And so another question is, Owen, if somebody has a scheduled inquiry with Daniel's already set up, should they cancel that and schedule it with you?
Their preference. I mean, it can go either way. I'm probably a little better resource than the person that will be on the inquiry call. Mm-hmm. So, but if it's already scheduled, I'd just say go forward. I mean, rather than undo it. But again, if it's close to a fit, the person who handles that inquiry call is going to refer it to me. And then they're going to have to start over and give me the same pitch.
Okay, good to know.
One of the reasons they set up the inquiry call was, again, to be open to anybody that wants to contact Daniel's Fund in regard to grant inquiries, but also to capture data for who has called and who has been told that's not a fit, so that we have all this data, from all the organizations, what their history is. Because I don't, if someone emails me, I don't put that into the database. We just have a conversation. And if it's a fit, we move forward. If it's not a fit, we don't. But it doesn't, no data gets captured that way. And so that's, it's good to go through the inquiry process to get registered in the system and things like that. So, I would say if it's already done, go forward with it.
Okay, good. And along those lines of something you just said, somebody asked if you needed to have an audit to submit with the proposal. So Owen, if you answer it first and then Lisa.
Sure. So it's an open question. The only time, there's 2 instances when we would require an audit before we fund an organization. One is if it's a very large organization and that's a multi-million-dollar budget, annual budget, and they've never been audited and they've been operating at that level for years, we might require an audit because, once you get into multi-million-dollar budgets, somebody should be auditing that. The other is if there's just some questionable financial dealings, and usually that has to do with related organizations. So, someone has, their brother-in-law has a construction company and the brother-in-law did half of the renovation for the new building and he got this. So things like that could trigger an audit. But it's very, very dependent on the circumstances. So it's not a deal killer. Usually it's case by case. So, if an organization is really large, they probably have been told this, you need to start doing audits. And if they're dealing with a lot of private, related people, someone has probably told them, you might need to get a third party to look at all that to sign off on it. So, things like that.
Okay, thanks. And what about you, Lisa? Do you all require an audit?
No audit required. And folks probably have experience, like Owen said, if you're going to launch a multi-million-dollar capital campaign, it probably wouldn't hurt to have an audit just to give peace of mind to donors.
Good. So Lisa, do you all ever do challenge grants? Like, you say, well, we'll give you, grant you $50,000 but you need to match that. You need to raise matching funds.
So we've done both, Robin. We've done challenge grants in the past, like I mentioned, and we still do some of those today, depending on where folks are in fundraising when we award the grant. If they're less than 50%, we'll make the commitment, your challenge with raising the balance or some threshold. And we have done matching grants in the past, dollar for dollar matching up to certain X number of dollars. They're not as common anymore. And we're very, very flexible on how we structure our grant to a grantee if they want to use that as a carrot to attract other donors. And we can position that how you'd like, and would love to work with nonprofits on that.
Great. What about you all, Owen? Do you do matching challenge
grants? Yeah,
grants?
we do challenge grants, and it usually happens in two cases. One where the grantee asks us to do a challenge grant, and then they use that as a incentive for other donors to get involved in the project. Or if our board decides that we want to get involved in a project, but they have a very limited funding base, and we want to give them an incentive to get more diversified funding base, the board sometimes makes a request, like 50% of it is challenge. So let's say you have a $100,000 grant. They might say, well, we're going to give you the $50,000 upon approval, but the second $50,000 is going to be a challenge, and we can pay it out in sections if you desire, but we'd prefer it all be at once, but we can pay it out in 2 payments if necessary. So if you get that first 25 additional funding, we'll pay this next 25 and then do it again. But the whole idea is an incentive to get new funders. And it's always, in that case, it's always a new funder. So it's not, you go back to your old funders and say, hey, we have a challenge from the Daniels Fund. Can you guys up your donation? We want it to be a new funder as of the date the challenge was made.
Okay. Yes, that's good to know. Yeah, because sometimes they already have a little bit raised when they come to you all. So right. That's good. And so kind of walk us through the process there, Owen. So you said, okay, so somebody talks to you and you all say, yeah, you know what? I think there could be a fit here.
Yeah.
What's then the next step? Do they do an LOI and then do a grant proposal, or what's the process?
Yeah, there's 2, and it depends on how strong the fit is. Let's take the first, say it's not real strong, but it's strong enough I think there's a chance. Then I would ask for a 1-page synopsis of the program, and I would kind of shop that internally to the grants team, the executives, and to see if there's support for that type of project. And if there is, then I'd invite an application. If I think it is definitely a strong fit, I would invite an application right off the bat, wouldn't need a 1-pager. And then once the application comes in, I produce a summary, a 2-page summary of that application. And it goes through a process where first it goes to the grants manager, who is an executive vice president of the organization. Currently, that's Kristen Todd. So we have a discussion. If it passes that, then it goes to a committee of the grants department. And there's 4 other program officers. They all have input. If it passes that, then it goes to the executive team, and they have input and can ask questions and can put on requirements or make me go back out and get more information if I didn't answer all the questions in my 2-page summary. If it passes that, then it goes to the board and they vote.
Wow.
Yeah.
Quite the process.
Yeah.
Lisa, what about you? What's the process if they talk to you and there's a fit?
And they don't even have to talk to me. If it's a capital grant, it's an open application process. Go ahead and submit a capital grant as long as you're meeting those requirements, 30%. And if it's within one of our funding priorities, yeah. So
Okay.
just apply.
Okay.
If you have questions, again, like Owen and I stress, I'm always available to help navigate that process. If you think you have a really good fit for the one of our initiated strategic priorities, give us a call. Let's see if that's a fit. There is no process for that. It's just a conversation, and it's more of building relationships with those partners in funding strategies.
Great. Okay, so a question just came in, and this will be for both of you all. We're still doing COVID response work. Can we contact you regarding a COVID grant? Also, can we ask for grant funding for a program or operating in addition to COVID relief? So in other words, can they ask for 2 programs, or, you know, and then is there specific grant calendar? Is it rolling? And then what's the turnaround? So Lisa, let's start with you. COVID funding.
We have no more COVID funding available for 2020, and we have gotten no approval for future COVID funding at this time. We have 2 capital grant deadlines a year, March 15th for a June grant review meeting, September 15th for a December grant review meeting. Obviously, this year was a crazy year. Some of those things changed in there. Did I answer all parts of that question?
Yes, I
Okay.
think you did. And what about you all, Owen, for COVID funding?
Since COVID started, we started doing approvals for COVID emergency grants to our board by email, so we can get it done in like a week, 2 weeks at the most. But that's if it's strictly a COVID emergency grant, and if it's some money that we've worked with already in the past. If it's a new grantee and it's strictly COVID, process would be, again, go through me. If I think I can get an approval, we could go through the emergency process, and it's just done by email, and it's done quick, you know, a week or a week and a half, and the check goes out the door. If it's a combination of a program and a COVID, then that has to go through our normal cycle. And our normal cycle, we have 8 meetings per year, 2 meetings per quarter. One of the meetings, the first meeting of the quarter, is for grants above 50,000. And the second meeting of the quarter is for grants below, or 50,000 and below. So every quarter we have 2 meetings. Your grant application gets put into one of those. The grant application has to come in around 2 months prior to that meeting to go through the process I already described as far as all the different levels it goes through. So for example, you know, our last meeting of this year will take place on December 1st, and that docket is being finalized right now, so we can't do any more. But we still have emergency money left. So if it's strictly a COVID emergency grant, email me. If it still has to fit with one of our funding areas related to COVID, so it can't just be, you know, totally outside of our funding priorities. So it has to fit in one of our funding areas. And then if it's a COVID emergency grant, we can look at it, and we have money left, and we still are processing that in a week to 2 week time.
Great. Okay, so a lot of nonprofits, especially right now, the PPP has run out, are looking for funding for staff, so capacity grants. So Owen, do you all exclude administrative costs from the grant, that you won't fund that? Do you do capacity grant funding or not?
So it's not a hard and fast rule. It depends on the case by case, depends on the organization, how strongly it fits. But in general, capacity and administrative and staff is not a high priority. So it has trouble getting through and getting to an approval. If somebody is coming to me with a program grant that has a high percentage chance of getting an approval, and they make the grant be specific for one staff person that's going to run that program, I just tell them, rewrite it. Give me the whole budget, put the staff member in there, but do not tie that salary to this grant, because our board does not want to be responsible for someone's specific salary, because if they don't fund it next year, that person's going to lose their job, and they don't want that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. What about you all, Lisa?
Yeah, so obviously with capital, we'll take some consideration time, adds to the project budget, fundraising costs, not all of them, but that we'll consider that as part of the project budget. In our initiated grant making for COVID relief, we reallocated a lot of our project-specific grants in 2020 towards general operating for those partner organizations. I don't know what that'll look like for 2021. Obviously, it'll be taken into consideration, but again, I don't know what that looks like.
Okay. And so while you're talking, another question, are there grants for economic development, attracting businesses and employees along with retention?
Yeah, we have examples of that across the state. So investment in, say, art space and community dialogue around space to create in different communities around the state. The more that you can involve community input in what economic development looks like, so all voices are at the table, and what revitalizing your downtown looks like, or those type of things, is our priorities for us. We did a lot of heavy investment in small business loans through vehicles, through mission-related investing and program-related investments through COVID, especially loans for populations that don't often have access to traditional capital. So women of color, Native First Bank, so Indigenous folks to Colorado, those type of investments. But yes, we do. Call me, I connect you, or call or swing me an email. I can connect you to that program staff, or if you look on our website, save the time, you can connect with our two community development folks, which are Laya Mitchell and Whitney Johnson.
Great, thanks. And there have been several requests in the chat box for your all's contact information. So near the end, we'll get the information so that people can have that and be able to contact you in the best way that you'd like for them to. Okay, so and let's say that you talk to somebody and you say, oh, it's a good fit, and it goes through the whole process that you're talking about, and then they don't get funded. And so do you have conversations with people? Do you provide something to help them so that they know whether to apply in the future, or what might you do after somebody doesn't get funded?
So first off, if they get approved, I just send them an email. If they get a decline, I send them an email and set up a phone call, and I want to have that phone call with anybody that got a decline, because if they got a decline, something went wrong. I misunderstood something either from my board, or I misunderstood something from them. Something went wrong, because our decline rate through our process is pretty small, because if it got that far to the board, it should be good. So it's probably, our decline rate is probably less than 5% at the board level. Now that doesn't, but you might not make it to the board level. But if they got a decline from the board, a formal decline, I'll have that conversation. But also there's a little bit of a penalty that comes with that. And that is they are ineligible to apply for 1 year. Mm-hmm. So this is what happens sometimes. I get a program, I think it's a fit. They do an application, I write my summary. The executive team, before it gets to the board, just cannot support it. So they just tell me, Owen, this is a little bit of a stretch. We're not going to support this. If this goes forward, it's most likely going to get a decline. So then I'm going to have a conversation with the grantee, and I'm going to tell them the situation, and I'm going to give them the option to rescind that grant so that they don't get that penalty of being ineligible for a year, and they can reapply. We have to figure out what went wrong and reapply in 3 months. So.
Okay. Good, great. What about you, Lisa?
I try to call most folks, and we send letters to everyone, and I'm open to conversation. The reality is, our capital grants program is so super competitive that some projects just don't rise to the top, and we don't know what's going to come in the next day. If we know a project's going to get done without us, it'll be a decline. It could be the best written proposal and widespread community support, but our $20,000, $40,000 grant isn't going to make a difference in the completion of that project, where in another part of the state, it may be more significant. We have to make those tough decisions. And that's probably most of the time with declinations, the conversation across the board. And rarely, often than not, or it's not truly comprehensive compared to whatever else is in that cycle of, okay, you're doing a major overhaul, new roof and windows and those type of things. But if someone wants something out of the ground, and our dollars can be better spent getting something out of the ground, that's maybe what we'll direct those grant dollars to.
So what I'm hearing is sometimes it's based on who else applies at the same time.
And I'd say 99% of the time, it's based on who else is applying at time and how strongly aligned those projects are with also our initiatives. If we get a bunch that day, or that cycle of, I don't know, charter schools or advocacy groups, or conserving land, or trail building, or And a business center in a rural downtown, a lot of those dollars are going to go towards those projects during that cycle. Unfortunately, if we denied the project, someone cannot reapproach us on a previously denied project. If the scope and scale changes to a degree that you've scrapped in or going to something else significantly different, we'll take a look at it. If it's another phase down the line, often with matching grants around state historic funds and those type of dollars, we're a great match for, we'll look at a future phase if we don't look at that phase.
Okay, but from what I hear, those phases, because sometimes what happens, especially what's happened here since March, mid-March, some of those capital projects have been taken a back seat. So what people have been doing is phasing them and say, oh, okay, so phase one's done. So now we're going to do phase two. But what you're saying is that's still the same capital project.
If you approach us if you approached us initially for the overall project, we denied the overall project. Right. If you approached us for phase one and that was, state historic fund is it's classic for us for doing for phasing. It was just exterior. We know interior renovations, especially for historic buildings that need to be ADA compliant and up to modern times, a lot of times state historic funds won't cover those pieces. So we'll look at that piece. Yeah.
Okay, and so as you've talked a little bit about this, Lisa, and then I'll go to Owen and ask the same question, but as far as how much to ask for, so you want them to have a certain percentage raised, and so then do they just look at what the total of the project is, and that's how they base what they would ask you for?
You can ask for what you need, an outrageous ask, or I'm not saying ask for what you need. No amount will disqualify you from from consideration, period. I think rule of thumb for you, I told you our average is around 55,000, our median grant's 30 to 40,000. So on that basis, it's rare we're 5% of a grant, depending on where we are geographically. And I think the size of our grants right now and the size of capital campaigns that are going on right now, we're 2 to 3%, sometimes less than 1% of a grant. Yeah, so again, you can look at what we funded in the past. Call me, let's have a conversation. I'm happy to remind folks, because it's no offense to us on what you asked for. Internal budgeting process for you and your board and your management team on your capital campaign is what I want to guide folks towards in how much other dollars they need to raise.
Right, good. Okay, what about you, Owen? You talked a little bit about that too.
Yeah, so first thing is what Lisa said, call me, let's discuss it. We do have some benchmarks though, and 10 to 15% is a benchmark in capital campaigns, but the actual size of the grant can, this year, a couple months ago, we funded a $500,000 capital grant for Monte Vista. We're looking at a couple $100,000 in Montrose for the Boys and Girls Club. We did Hope West for $400,000 earlier this year. So it just depends on the project. But it has to fit with one of our funding areas. So we just don't do all capital. Just because it's a capital program doesn't mean we're going to participate. As far as other programs, we again have some percentages that if I go above that, it gets questioned. So for example, on a program grant, if I'm above 30% of a program, I have to have some pretty good reasons why I would recommend that we fund higher than that. On a general ops, 10 to 15%, if we're higher than 15% on someone's entire budget, that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. But in rural Colorado, a lot of organizations are small, so it's not that hard to do 10% of their budget. Our average grant is $75,000, but it ranges from 20 up to $1 million. So it just depends on the project, the program, and the organization.
Great. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions here in just a minute. Is there anything that Lisa or Owen that I didn't ask you all that you'd want to be sure that everybody hears?
I think what makes a strong proposal on the capital side of things is how you've engaged community in designing your building, the purpose of your building, and how it's used. Your thought, the representation of voice in your organization, how thoughtful you are around fundraising and design. Do you need to build a new building? And the planning process around that, and your pro forma. What does it look like for you to run your new building versus renting in the past? What do these bills look like? Are you building your building reserve? How the plans looked? And for those that have done a capital campaign, probably already know, or have been doing this a long time, probably already know because it's been around forever. On our website, there is a capital campaign guide, planning guide. That's great to share with your board and things to think about and discuss as you're embarking on a capital campaign as well.
Which I recommend to for grantees. Go look at the Gates Family Foundation capital planning document. Yeah, so that's a good document to use.
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing is there needs to be solid planning, and you need to see that, you know, instead of coming in, we're not sure if we're going to do that, or we're not sure about that. You want to be sure that it's well thought out and it's something that's needed. Great. Okay, so let's open this up for questions. And so if I can ask you all to unmute yourself and ask the question, and then mute yourself back. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so who has a question? I can't see everybody's hand, so if you just want to unmute yourself and ask a question. You mean they answered everything? That's very cool. Okay, so let me go through this while you all are thinking about another question. Okay, so what about contact information for both of you?
Go ahead, Lisa.
It's on our website, but gatesfamilyfoundation.org. Okay. And L. Rucker at gatesfamilyfoundation.org.
LRUC, let me write it in the chat box.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, and my danielsfund.org website, everything's on there. My email is first initial last name at danielsfund.org. So O McAleer at danielsfund.org. There's an office direct line which tracks to my cell phone now, since I don't go in the office very much. There was another thing that I thought of that we didn't cover that I wanted to mention for program grants and for general operating grants. Our typical grant term is 1 year, 12 months. And at the end of the grant term, we require a final report. And then the final report, you know, I get the final report and I go through it. And if I have questions, I respond back to the grantee to answer the questions. And once all that's done, I sign off on the final report. And at that point, that organization is eligible for a new grant application. So what that actually means is our typical cycle for someone that we would fund on a reoccurring basis is anywhere from 15 to 18 months. It's not, even though it's a 12-month grant, it sometimes takes 18 months to get the next grant. Does that, so you go for a year and then you go through the process of a new application, has to be in 2 months prior to the meeting. So it's not an every 12-month cycle. It's more like 15 to 18 months.
Great. Okay. Any other questions? Did everybody get his email address, or does he need to drop it into the chat?
I'll drop it into the chat.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay, Nancy.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you? I haven't seen you for a long time.
I know. I love your background.
I know. I'm pretending I'm at one of our programs. My question is, my name is Nancy. I'm with Epic Experience. So we're looking to do some programs. You talked about collaborations with another nonprofit. We actually have 2 or 3 that we're looking to do some projects with. We serve adult cancer survivors, and others serve kids. So we're just trying to expand our reach in this time of COVID because of the psychological impact. So just curious, collaboration to fund two nonprofits, or would we apply separately and say it's the same project? Does that make sense?
I would leave it to you, Owen. We don't fund in that arena.
Pardon me?
I was going to let Owen answer since he funds in that arena.
Okay, so first of all, I don't know if that would be a fit or not, but in general, if you're doing a collaboration, one organization is usually the lead.
Okay.
And so that organization, so I gave you an example earlier. Bright Futures is an organization out of Telluride, but they run a 7-county collaboration for early childhood education, and we fund that, but it goes through Bright Futures, but the funding is for the collaboration.
Okay, thank you.
And so I just learned something. I didn't know Bright Futures was out of Telluride. I thought it was out of here. I know Grace Anschutz is on the call and she works for them, but they're at
a different Bright Future.
Oh, so there's 2 Bright Futures in Colorado?
So
I think they do early childhood programming. Yeah, and we do domestic violence and sexual assault. But great name for both looking to make futures brighter.
There you have it.
Great.
Nothing's more confusing than the exact same name for 2 different organizations.
Bright Future Foundation in Eagle County does violence prevention for women and children.
Okay, got it.
Robin, may I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
This is Mary Ann, and I am with the administrator of the Eagle Chamber of Commerce. We have established our own foundation. And as a newbie into this, what guidance can we get to help us move forward? I've gotten some great notes today, but it seems to me that we really have to do a lot of planning, make sure we know that what we want to do is work. We have multiple areas that we want to cover. You know, we're talking about employee assistance for mental health issues because we know that is an issue. We have, people being able, businesses being able to recruit and retain employees to live here in the Eagle area. So any guidance from anyone who has a relatively new foundation and how we can move forward with ours? Don't all answer at the same time.
I think something that we struggle with, staff struggles with at the Gates Family Foundation, a private family foundation, is how to engage community voice more in our decision making. I mean, you're looking at the diversity, one of the 2 diversities on our staffs, and I may have a different lived experience, but who, the folks that need economic or, assistance, employee assistance, what's the employee voice in that decision-making process to know? And I'm sure their bosses are engaged in that process, but what about the employees themselves? So the more you can engage community input and get feedback and have a loop there of constant feedback, I think informs your grant making.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have good advice for you. I don't know.
Great. Okay. Are there any other questions that for either Owen or Lisa?
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Anyone in the group, just how's everyone doing? Give me the lay of the land into that. I mean, how's everybody faring? What are you scared of? How similar it is to what we're experiencing? I mean, with ski season coming up, what are you bracing for? I don't know who wants to, or who all wants to chime in. I'm sure it's different for different organizations.
I can answer that on behalf of the businesses here in Eagle. We're really concerned about the winter months, particularly for the restaurant community. Are they going to survive? Because basically every community, whatever you are, you always go to the restaurants and say, can you help make a donation to whatever our fundraiser is, or etc. And we need to support those businesses this winter. Some communities, Vail is doing a great job of getting the tents out for the restaurants so that they can stay open. We understand that Beaver Creek is as well. But this is going to be a tough season for those businesses that we rely on heavily. And it's not only whether the business survives, but what about their employees? And this is where I came into the comment about, you know, the mental health, and because they are really struggling. And one restaurant here, he said, it's really bad out there. And yet we know some businesses are doing just fine, but I don't know what we can do. There is some help coming with restaurants through the state's Restaurant Association, grants to get tents and heaters for outdoor dining, but we just got to support them. And I think that is going to be a telltale thing, as well as, you know, is the ski season going to be as successful as Vail Resorts is working on? Because with our COVID numbers rising, I don't know who's going to be coming.
I have to say, I mean, you touched on when COVID started, again, our community is around oncology, and we are very closely connected with Shaw Cancer Center, the hospital in Glenwood, and then University of Colorado. And the medical team and the stress, we could feel it from our partners. So in correlation to restaurants, what we did as a nonprofit is we started bringing meals out to the hospital. We served them just to hopefully raise spirits. So we did that at Callaway Young in Glenwood Springs. We did it at UC Health. And our hope was just because the frontline medical workers are so stressed, but at the same point, I didn't ask the restaurants I was using for a discount. So it was twofold. It was like, I'm helping the restaurants and I'm serving the people that are working so hard to keep everybody safe. So that's a great way that, and let me tell you, I mean, we got incredible. We didn't do it for thank yous. We just did it to know that they know somebody is appreciating everything they're doing, because these people are putting their lives on their line, being frontline workers in the medical community. And it is bad right now. University of Colorado, I know, is not taking any, they're full, and COVID is just wreaking havoc right now. So that's one way to support the restaurants.
So as a comment, in the metro area, we funded an emergency grant. It was through one of our grantees, Colorado Succeeds, but they were just the fiscal sponsor. But the grant was for restaurants to utilize their facilities to provide food for people who have lost jobs, people who have food insecurities, families that are no longer their kids are no longer getting lunches through the school system. So we launched a program, and it was like Nancy was saying, it was a dual process. We were helping the restaurants, and yet they were serving the underserved community. So if you did something like that in the Eagle Valley, where I worked with an existing grantee, and they were fiscal sponsor for the whole restaurant group, and funded them to provide meals to people in need, I could work with that.
Good to know. Anybody else? Katie?
I can go. Katie Zinn with Access Unbound. I think, you know, in the reason that I wanted to say is because our organization supports people with disabilities to access professional recreation. And so, you know, we're really, our concern obviously is there's a huge mental health component already that has been exacerbated by this, because a lot of these people with disabilities are trapped in a sense, even more so because they may be higher risk. And so that's been a real concern for us. And because we don't offer direct COVID support, we've definitely seen that impact our funding. And so that's nerve-wracking. We launched to your point, Owen, we launched a fundraiser this fall that we are going to continue to do, but it was the first time we've done it. We're a relatively new organization, which a lot of these guys on the call already know about, but it was a card that people purchased for a discount to our organization, but we actually had 105 businesses and restaurants throughout the Valley that were offering cardholders a discount. So really trying to help support our local economy as well as support our local people by getting them discounts. And, you know, it was for a short period of time, but the response has just been really heartwarming. And so I think, yes, to Marianne's point, we definitely saw a difference in Eagle restaurants and businesses participating down in Eagle, but up Valley, they were much more responsive and things seem to be going okay. Although, you know, it seems to be very hit and miss, to your point, Lisa, and about who's doing okay and who's not. And it just sort of depends. But yeah, I think everybody's a little worried. We're closely tied to the outdoor recreation industry in the Valley. And so we are a little concerned about what might actually happen or how things are going to work out. But, you know, I think everybody, I know most of these people on the call, we've all been pivoting. Rebecca at the United Way and Sarah have done an amazing job. So everybody's really trying to kind of come together and support each other, which is really nice to see.
Oh, Katie, that's really nice. This is Rebecca.
Hi. Yeah, they've launched an amazing program. So
yeah, thank you. And so for that matter, I did want to say a word about what we're seeing. Of course, we're typically a grantor and we've had our own COVID fund. And then we also have a direct service program happening for COVID response right now as well. And I would like to say on behalf of the nonprofit community that I think everyone is nervous about the funding getting either shifted to COVID relief that might have otherwise gone to services and programs or general operating, and the inability to hold the traditional fundraising events is drastically impacting their revenue. So many nonprofits are actually already putting their employees on furlough. And of course, that's impacting their ability to do their job, to meet the mission. And then with regards to direct service, I think it's getting scary right now because we have a lot of families that have been having difficulties making rent for months on end. And they're getting food, of course, from the food bank for months on end. And maybe they'll go back to work, maybe in December or January, maybe, but they've already exhausted all of the various resources in our community. And then it's especially impacting the immigrant community. I would say especially hard. I'll stop there. I know there's a lot of other issues, but those are the top two that come to mind, both with regards to the nonprofit landscape in the Valley, as well as the individual families that we're all serving.
And Sue, do you want to kind of tag on to that? Because I saw you shaking your head.
Love to. I'm with Vail Valley Salvation Army, and we actually were in a pretty enviable position as far as getting COVID funding. We do a lot of COVID relief. We raised well over $500,000, and we've spent most of it because we did just until the end of September. From March, we spent over $420,000 in rental assistance, and we gave out the equivalent of more than $116,000 in food, which was to 3,747 households, which consisted of 9,310 individuals. Anyway, I was trying to use some of those for grant writing, but the issue is some of our funders
my big fear is gave money to COVID, so will they do their normal donations for general operating? And it's kind of scary. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I agree with what Rebecca said. Two of the local businesses I know were very creative in the beginning, and they ended up getting funding from private individuals so that they could make meals for our rescue workers and the health workers. And one of the businesses also made meals and soups and breads that they brought to our food pantry that we gave to different clients. So it was a way of them being able to stay in business and keep people working, as well as helping, our community. So it's been a really rough time period. We also have not been able to have any of our normal fundraising events. So we're even doing Thanksgiving food baskets differently this year, giving out gift cards in lieu of food boxes because of COVID. So I think we've all had to get very creative. Both the people who are doing a lot of COVID relief and the nonprofits that aren't. And I think it's going to be a struggle. I don't see this going away anytime soon. Thanks for letting me say something, Robin.
Yeah, thanks, Sue.
As a youth organization, we've been impacted kind of a different way. So I work for Girl Scouts of Colorado. And with the schools being somewhat open, but closed down to outside organizations, we're not able to get into the schools and recruit like we normally would and get our message out to parents and girls. So we're a membership organization and we're being impacted by membership, but also like most of the other nonprofits here, if you're not COVID relief direct, a lot of the funding shifted away. And so that's impacted our budget as well as everybody else not being able to have our normal fundraising events. So it's been a really hard hit this year, but we're like every other youth organization experiencing the same thing. Just the recruitment efforts have been impacted greatly. So we're just seeing numbers being a problem at this time.
Thanks, Cindy. So Lisa, that was a long answer to your question, but I think it helps kind of you all see where we are up here in the mountains, huh?
I'm glad there couldn't be a short answer. I mean, everything we're going to, and unfortunately, it's not the first time I've heard any of it, right? There's budgets affected 80, 90%. The numbers out there that 30 to 40% of nonprofits across the country are going to shut their doors. Cindy, I serve on the board of a youth serving organization, have to get creative about fundraising, and we don't know how to do it. I mean, board members don't want to go to another Zoom fundraiser, right? So like, how do we, and just coming with those answers, and number one, can't get in kids, of course, and you can't get in the doors of the school, and that's your revenue. So yeah, I feel the pain. I'm hearing it across the board, which is interesting to me. March 15th was our first deadline for capital in 2020. We had 75 capital grant requests in the door. I thought some way, shape, or form come our next deadline on September 15th, that, oh my gosh, people are definitely going to be putting their brakes on a capital grant during this climate. Almost 50 capital grant requests came in. So it'll just going to be interesting to see. I throw my hands up. I have no idea what to expect any way, shape, or form from a purely responsive capital grants program. So interested to see what 2021 and 2022 look like. I think what I've heard from people that have been doing this a long time is that after the recession, the 2 years after were the hardest for fundraising for folks. And I hope that's not the case and things bounce back quickly. But it feels like we're all just bracing and bracing and bracing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I keep telling people we're all improv actors because we've never been through this before. And so we're kind of building the plane as we're flying and trying to, figure out how to do this. So, okay, I'm going to ask both Lisa and Owen one more question, and then we're going to let you off of here early and give you one of the most valuable things, 10 minutes of free time. Imagine that. So Lisa and Owen, if you could wave your magic wand and you could bestow anything on the nonprofits that are here today that would help them, what might that be?
My goodness. Well, I guess my answer would be, if I can't give you money, I can give you time. I'm going to give you the most candid, forthright answer to your questions. I'm not going to lead you on. If I think I can get a grant approval, I'll work with you. If I don't think I can get an approval, I'll tell you right off the bat and save you a lot of time and effort.
Great, thank you. That's great, because we would love to have just honest feedback and save us time and save you all time.
That's too hard. Magic wand.
You didn't know you had a magic wand today, huh?
Like some of you, I'd love it if you could be out of business, right? That you didn't have to provide the services that you provide. And then the rest, just big angel donors for each of you. And put the development, not that you guys don't do great work, but development directors out of business. So you just get that solid check every year. Yeah.
I love it. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Owen. Every time that we've had some funders on the panel, afterwards, I hear feedback that they get better requests, because now people are clearer about what to ask for and how to ask and the process to go through. And so I just appreciate so much both of you being willing to take your time today and talk to us here at the Nonprofit Learning Series. We're sponsored by Bell Valley Partnership, Mountain Youth, and US Bank. And so everybody attends for free. I do it for free. We just offer it to the community, and the Bell Valley Partnership and Mountain Youth get it out to the nonprofit public. So thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all.